You have most likely wondered, what is the best dividend ETF that I can invest into? And in today's video, I will be comparing two of the absolute best dividend ETFs out there, and that is SCHD, or the Charles Schwab US Dividend Equity ETF, and VIG, or the Vanguard Dividend Appreciation ETF. When you start investing, it is extremely important to have a solid foundation, and the perfect tool for creating a solid foundation is an ETF. And that is exactly why I decided to compare two of the absolute best and most popular dividend ETFs out there, so that you can create the perfect foundation for your dividend portfolio. But in case you're new to the channel, then my name is Casper, and here we strictly talk about investing and financial freedom. So if you really like to receive passive income, and if you're on a journey to retire early, well then press that subscribe button below. But without wasting any more time, then let's jump straight into it. So let's start out by talking about VIG. And VIG is actually the largest dividend-focused ETF out there, as they have $66 billion of assets under management. And they only have an expense ratio of 0.06%, and that means that for every $10,000 that you have invested, well then you have to pay $6. So that is basically nothing. And now let's talk about one of the most important things when it comes to picking an ETF, and that is the diversification and the exposure. VIG has 317 companies in total, with biggest positions in big well-known companies like Microsoft, Apple, Exxon, and so on. And when you're looking at the list, well then it does seem like they have a very decent distribution among their top 10 holdings. However, they do have very large positions in companies like Microsoft and Apple. But let's have a look at the sector breakdown. We see that overall, well then they do have the largest exposure to technology companies, and that accounts for 22% of their entire portfolio. And that is then followed by financials that account for 18% of their portfolio. However, overall, then they do have a very decent distributions among the sectors, but they do have a very big exposure to tech companies that accounts for almost 1/4 of their entire portfolio. And when you look at the returns year to date, well then you do see that VIG has returned almost 3% to their investors. And when we compare this return with the return of the S&P 500, well then we do see a very big difference in performance, as the S&P 500 has returned 13% year to date. And even though VIG has been heavily outperformed by the S&P 500 index, well then is the performance of the two much closer when you look at the long term. And when looking at the last 5 years, well then we can see that VIG has given a return of 48%, while the S&P 500 index has given almost 56%. So the performance here is much more similar. And when looking at the graph, we can even see that apart from this year, well then has the performance been very close. But overall, then is the returns for VIG very solid for a dividend-focused ETF. They have also received a golden star from Morningstar, and in order to get that, well then you need to show really good past performance results, but they also need to believe that you can continue doing this, and that is based on your investing strategy. So now we have looked a bit at their performance, and then let's move on to the dividends. They have a dividend yield of 2%, and they have a 5-year growth rate of almost 10%, and that means that the investors have seen the dividend grow by almost 10% on average per year, and that is amazing. And the dividend itself has been growing for 9 consecutive years. Overall, then is VIG looking really solid. They have a decent diversification, and the returns have been really good, apart from this year of course. But also when you look at their dividends, well then they do have some really good dividend stats, and they are increasing the dividends by a double digit, and have done that for the last 9 years in a row, and that is impressive. SCHD is most likely the most popular dividend ETF out there. However, it is much smaller than VIG when you're looking at the assets under management. And here does SCHD only have $48 billion. And as mentioned before, then did VIG had $66 billion. SCHD does also have a very low expense ratio of only 0.06%, and that is the exact same as VIG. But let's talk about the top holdings and the diversification, because that is where these two ETFs becomes very different. SCHD only has 104 stocks in total, with top holdings in big well-known dividend companies like Amgen, Broadcom, Pfizer, PepsiCo, and so on. And when you're looking at the different sectors, well then you do see that SCHD has their largest exposure to the industrial, with 18% of their entire portfolio, and that is then closely followed by healthcare of 17%. And for SCHD, well then does technology come in at a 5th place, whereas for VIG it was the number 1, and that accounted for almost 1/4 of their entire portfolio. Overall, then is SCHD much better diversified. They don't have a single dominating sector like VIG did, but it is more evenly spread across the different sectors. But let's have a look at the performance of SCHD. They have given investors a return of -4% year to date. And when we compare that with the returns of VIG and the S&P 500, well then we basically see that SCHD has underperformed both of them, but they have especially underperformed the S&P 500. However, when you look at the last 5 years, you do see a very different picture. SCHD has returned almost 70% and has outperformed both VIG and the S&P 500 index. So the returns for SCHD is usually very good. But one of the main reasons as to why SCHD has had such a bad performance during this year is that they have a very low exposure to technology companies, and we have mainly seen technology stocks increase during this year. However, over the long term, well then has this ETF here performed very well. But let's have a look at their dividends. They currently have a dividend yield of 3.7%, and over the last 5 years, they have been growing that dividend with nearly 14% on average per year. And that is absolutely amazing. They both have a higher yield than VIG, and they have been increasing at a more rapid pace than VIG. And they have also been growing that dividend for the last 11 consecutive years. Overall, when it comes to dividends, well then is SCHD very hard to beat. They are basically increasing that dividend at a very rapid pace, and somehow they just continue doing that. So when it comes to SCHD, you're not only getting a broad-based and well-diversified ETF, but you're also getting an ETF that has very solid dividends, and that over the long term has given investors really good returns. So you basically get all of that in one. The only downfall right now to SCHD, as I see it, is that they have a very low exposure to tech stocks. However, if they somehow manage to fix that, well then it basically becomes the perfect dividend ETF. So when it comes to my opinion on whether to side with VIG or SCHD, well then I'm gonna pick SCHD, and that is basically because I get everything that I want. I get extremely good dividends, I get a very good return, and I get a very well diversified portfolio. I basically get everything that I want by investing into this single ETF, and that is why I do believe that SCHD is a better alternative than VIG when it comes to a dividend ETF. That was basically all I had in today's video. Thank you for watching the video. I hope that you enjoyed the video, and if you did, then don't forget to smash the like button below and subscribe to my channel for more weekly content just like this. See you guys in the next one.